Hello everybody, my name is David George Gordon. I'm better known as the Bug Chef, and I'm the author of the Eat a Bug cookbook. That's a book that has recipes for everything from little tiny termites all the way up to giant tarantula spiders. 40 recipes. The book was originally published in 1998 and was republished in 2013. I've spent the last 20-some years traveling around the country and in a few foreign nations as well, cooking with insects. That makes me an entomophagist, fancy word for a bug eater. Now, in that time, I've had lots of experiences, I've met lots of interesting people, and I've had some wonderful opportunities to study entomophagy up close. In the course of that study, I came across Vincent M. Holt. I jokingly say he's the man that nobody knows, because while his book, Why Not Eat Insects, was published in 1885 in London, it got lots of press at the time and continues to get cited a lot in other places. Lots of other books make reference to Why Not Eat Insects, but ironically, no one really seems to know who Vincent Holt was. There's not a single photograph of him, for example. And in books like the Food and Agriculture Organization's amazing report on edible insects, is a 188-page document published in 2013. They certainly talk about Vincent Holt as a forerunner, a free thinker, if you will, about edible insects. But again, we don't know who he was. They're alternately saying he was a clergyman, I guess that's a guess, or an entomologist, or a clergyman and entomologist. I know that he was also a writer. He wrote at least one other book. Interesting stuff, but again, we don't really know the man himself. Now, we can conjecture a lot about Holt just by the very nature of the conditions of the time in which he lived. He lived in London. The book was published in the 1880s. It was a 99-page book. So it was really kind of a treatise, if you will, sort of a pamphlet. And it sold for about, well, the equivalent of about 35 or 40 cents. It was a popular book. It got lots of coverage in the time. The conditions in Victorian England were surprisingly similar to the conditions that we have today in our modern day world. I know that seems odd. We like to think that we're going through things that no one has experienced before. But of course, come on, we have all experienced these things in other ways in other times. It was a time of great food insecurity. Today, we're all focused on food, whether we'll have enough to feed the world's rapidly growing human population. We had a series of potato famines in Ireland shortly before Holt started writing his book. The first of those famines killed over 1 million people in Ireland. That's a major hit. There was a second famine shortly after that in Finland. And Finland lost 15% of its population during that famine. So obviously, food insecurity was weighing heavily on people's minds. I should also point out, in that time, the third famine in Ireland hit about 6 or 7 years before Holt was inspired to write his book. It was fresh. It was something people were really concerned about. When's the next one going to hit? And Holt, I have to say, was not concerned about feeding everyone. He didn't think we all needed to eat insects, but he did think that the poor people should be eating insects. He says in his book, the master could be enjoying his roast beef, while the servants downstairs could be eating wholesome food like grasshoppers. He thinks that's a great way to go. It was also an era of mass media. And by that I mean there was a major breakthrough They didn't invent the internet like we have today, but they did invent a major refinement, the rotary drum printing press, which vastly sped up the way people produced books and led to an amazing proliferation of publications that were affordable. In the past, only rich people had private libraries. With the rotary drum press and these massive iterations of books, now people on average incomes could afford their own home library. It was really a wonderful thing for the world. And I have to tell you, Holt published his book, and his publisher at the same time published around 40 different books a year. That was a lot. In fact, there was one stretch between 1879 and 1905 when his publisher, Leadenhall Press, issued over 400 different titles. 400. Amazing. And that doesn't even count multiple iterations of the same title. So they were quite prolific with their output. It was also a climate of moral obligation. People were do-gooders then, and suddenly it was in vogue to be taking care of the less fortunate people, not just amassing wealth. I hope that's a lesson that people start getting into again as we go around in this cycle of life. And things like, well, institutions like the Red Cross suddenly became popular, these really large organizations doing humanitarian good works. I find this interesting because a lot of the people who are into entomophagy now, the people who are producing bug products or insect farms for human consumption, they're doing this out of motivations of doing good for others. It's not about making big bucks. Let me tell you, that's a fact. For example, I have friends who have an organization that works with people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and in that organization, they provide orphanages with the technology to raise insects for food. We're talking about a culture in the Congo that already likes certain insects for food. It's not like a novel idea for them. It's something they've had for a long time. But malnutrition is rampant in the Congo. And this program, they're actually raising insects, in this case, palm weevils, big grubs, look kind of like Jimmy Dean sausages when you look at them up close. And very nutritious. They raise them. They sell them at markets to make money for the orphanage, and they also eat them themselves. Great way of combating hunger. This idea of humanitarianism through bug eating is a fascinating concept, and I'm really glad it's a part of our world today. What would Holt think of this enormous explosion of interest in entomophagy? Well, I think he would be greatly pleased by the acceptance of so many people. Thank you all for joining me here through the miracle of the internet. Let's take this moment to raise our cricket energy bars high for Professor Florence Dunkel, the host of this year's 33rd Annual Bug Buffet at Montana State University. 33 years, that's just amazing. Congratulations, Professor Florence Dunkel. I'm glad you could join me. And here's what we say, bug appetit. Mwah. That's good. Wow, you can really taste the crickets. All right.